As part of the Fulbright Distinguished Awards in Teaching Grant, I've spent the last 5 months here in India looking at new initiatives for vocational education. As a vocational educator in America, I thought this was a timely issue because both nations are really looking at new initiatives to increase post-secondary workforce readiness. For example, in Colorado, we've started the Individual Career and Academic Plan, and here in India, starting 3 years ago, a new national skills qualification framework was launched in order to increase the amount of vocational education in secondary schools. Just quickly, in the US, we've replaced the term vocational with career and technical education, or CTE, primarily because of the negative stigma associated with vocational education, which is a shame because if you look at the root of the word to call or to find one's calling, I think that speaks volumes to the impact that vocational education can have on student learning. But I'll be using both terms interchangeably. So why India? Well, both the US and India have a similar perceived skills gap that we'll be talking about in a minute. And both countries have similar cultural attitudes towards work that have a knowledge hierarchy that values certain professions more than others. But primarily, both are really investing quite a bit in post-secondary workforce readiness, both in terms of new policy and funding. And you can see why. Youth unemployment is much higher than in that age group than other segments of the population. And then students that have gone on to college, which was a big push in both countries in the last decade, are finding themselves underemployed or unemployed. And this has huge impacts, not just on the individual, but also on the community and the economics of a nation. From a business perspective, there are a lot of jobs that are going unfilled simply because the students that are graduating from our high schools are not coming with the kind of skills needed to fill these vacancies and may not achieve them even after earning a degree. Along these lines, India's got a lot of new initiatives. In fact, 17 different ministries are involved in some kind of skill development scheme. But my focus was on the National Skills Qualification Framework, which was introduced 3 years ago, and it was really aimed at targeting the secondary and post-secondary level. At the secondary level, which is where I spent the majority of my time, new vocational courses are being introduced at all government schools around the country. A lot of this policy was based on observations from other nations, but as we know, no one policy will work in all countries. And so the focus of my research was to identify best practices that can be integrated into any model. And I've identified 5 that I'd like to make recommendations on, both for my district and here in India as well. There's a lot of reasons why CTE or vocational education works. A lot of studies show that it creates lifelong learners while helping students engage more in their high school experience. So huge impacts on student learning. But there are still a lot of challenges, including the negative perception of vocational education, as well as the gap between educational systems and the workforce, or skills gap, which we'll talk about. Anytime one of these best practices addresses a critical challenge, I've marked that with a star. In my research, I've actually determined that there are 3 separate definitions for skills gap. The traditional one, which is sort of the skills that students are trained in versus the skills that industry actually needs, stands. But so too are the soft skills, or what I'd like to call professional skills, that students even after earning technical skills may lack in order to make them employable. And finally, from the student perspective, just a gap between knowing how their strengths and aptitudes and what they're learning in their content classes relates to the kind of careers and job roles that are out there. So 3 definitions that are related, but each of them have different causations and different solutions. And we'll be trying to address these in each of the best practices. A lot of methodologies, a lot of acronym, in my methodologies. I began with policy review at the national level of the new National Skills Qualification Framework and the concepts and policies that help shape it, as well as the policy holders, both nationally and internationally, stakeholders in the policy. I looked at the skills sector Skills Council, which helped, they're comprised of industry and industry partnerships that helped devise the new national occupational standards and reviewed those standards in a variety of different job roles. And then looked at the agencies that were helping to create and shape the curriculum, like the Central Institute of Vocational Education, the National Skills Development Corporation at the secondary level, as well as players at the post-secondary level and the relationship between the two. And finally, I looked at implementation through a series of interviews, both with the public-private partnerships as well as schools, talking with principals, teachers, and also students and foundations about how this actually looks in the real world. Let's talk about the best practices. Demand-driven rather than supply-driven Vocational programming needs to be developed based on data, and this data would give an idea of what sort of skills are needed, both technical and professionally, for the 21st century workforce. So this eliminates the supply model where we're making a lot of beauticians and students certified in automotive, but the reality is that there's actually a need for manufacturing jobs, for example. This helps create education and industry linkages because these two players need to talk. And in doing so, we can help address that first definition of the skills gap. In the meantime, it also identifies meaningful pathways for students who see that at the end of this class, there's a real-world application for the skills they've been learning. The good news is the data already exists. The National Skills Corporation in India has done a national survey, and in each state they've identified the skills gaps that currently exist and are projected to exist. And our own Bureau of Labor Statistics creates this sort of data in their handbook each year. At the state level, we also have ideas from the Colorado Community College system that help indicate what sort of job roles are needed in the different career clusters. But the piece that I'd like to recommend that's missing is at the local level. We have advisory committees. I have one, for example, in my agriculture classroom. And that can help advise me on curriculum and planning new trends in my industry, but it can't tell me if we do need a manufacturing program in our community. So my recommendation would be the creation of localized advisory committees that are made up of industry members and organizations. For example, in my district, that might be Workforce Boulder County or the Chamber of Commerce. Here in India, it might look like the local, the panchayats or district program coordinators. And their job is to advise on where the local skills gaps are and to help direct the sort of programming like ICAP or CTE offerings in each of these areas. This alone wouldn't be their only role. They can also help advise in student job shadows or internships or a few of the other pipeline-oriented projects that I'll be talking about in just a minute. If we've been successful, then that means that all of our graduates, both in my district and the National Skills Qualification Framework graduates, would be enrolled in some kind of post-secondary education, training, or formal employment within 1 year. So a 0% need because they've been advised of what their options are upon in their local community upon graduation. Just plugging students into jobs, however, doesn't really work. We need to give students an opportunity to focus on their own aptitudes and interests and strengths, and then take these motivations, these personal motivations, and give them an opportunity to test them out in the world of work. This allows students to drive the process, making it a personalized experience that hopefully goes from a very broad idea of, okay, what I'm good at and what I'd like to do with my life, to a more focused opportunity that gets them into the professional environment. And allows them to look at how their academic and vocational skills can be applied. Again, we've made some strides both here in India as well as the US towards this end, using primarily online tools. For example, in Colorado, we use Naviance, which helps students set personal and academic goals, but we can add to this, including new programs like Indigo that help them look at personal strengths. Here in India, there's a product called My Kensho that's based from a couple of different public and private partnerships that have a pathway for students that allow them to explore their own strengths and explore what those look like in the world of work. So my recommendation here is mostly to continue to utilize these online tools, but also to develop curriculum around them that helps students direct their own explorations into self-selected jobs or educational opportunities. So one way we can improve that is to link the kind of outcomes that they discover using these tools to course offerings within our district. In India, that might look like curriculum modules that are broad in scope, so rather than associated with particular job roles, that actually allow for all students starting in a younger grade, so class 9 and 10, to start focusing on their own career goals. If we've done this well, then graduates, both in the BVSD and the National Skills Qualification Framework, will graduate high school or secondary school with at least 1 or 2 pathways that they've identified and have had a chance to explore to some degree. Well, how do they do that? Good question. This third best practice is one that I think is incredibly important, primarily because neither country is doing it. In fact, the only models that really exist are in Germany and to some degree Switzerland. 100% participation. This is the idea that vocational education is not just meant for students who, quote, need it, either because of socioeconomic factors or because they've struggled in traditional classrooms, but that all students can benefit from exploring what their strengths are, what careers exist, what potential pathways might be open to them after graduation. What this does is ends the negative social bias against CTE coursework, because every student is exploring their own calling, and some might find it in one area, maybe in trades, skilled trades, while others might find it in another, such as healthcare. This creates a platform as well for them to start thinking about soft skills or professional skills. All students need to know how to conduct a job interview or how to present their findings in front of an audience. So what this could look like? Well, in Germany, there's a great example of a 3-week period where all students are required to set up and then undergo their own internship. And from that, they address other standards in core content areas like language and math. It might look like the classroom at first, where students are led by a counselor, for example, like the Colorado ICAP activities, but then it becomes increasingly more specialized as students branch off into areas of their own interest that they've explored through the student-centered research. And it might culminate in projects like job shadowing or internships or mentorships with industry. My recommendation for both BVSD as well as here in India is to create a supplementary curriculum platform that reaches grades 6 through 12 in the US or class 9 through 12 here in India, that allows students to look at, again, a more broad focus on the world of work, becoming increasingly more student-driven and content-specific. Well, this can look a variety of ways. Fortunately, in Colorado, my district has implemented or adopted a new learning management system, Schoology, which can allow access to both teachers and students. This is an open resource, and I'll show you how to join at the end of the presentation, that any student can use, both in the US and here in India, that is free and online. And in each of these different levels, there are activities. The student-directed activities, teacher-directed activities, and counselor-directed activities for each grade. The joy of the open curriculum is that these activities can be populated by teachers or educators in specific content areas, for example. So a math teacher who might have a lesson about calculating wages, or a language arts teacher about a personal narrative where students interviewed someone about their career. They can post it here and that can be shared. So too can counselor activities from each school, so they don't have to necessarily work in isolation. If we've done this well, then every graduate will have at least a couple of activities that they've participated in each year that allows them to relate what they're learning in their content area to career readiness, and also gives them an opportunity to start thinking about the sort of choices that they need to make towards the end of their secondary school career in order to best prepare them for what life will be like after graduation. A best practice that I am seeing in a lot of different ways in many of the models, including here in India as well as the US, is that they are work-based. So this is no longer a pedagogy of just theory of rote memorization, but the learning by doing. But this can look a variety of different ways. The traditional career and tech ed classroom in America might have half theory, half practical. In India, we have a lot of field visits and guest lecturers and job shadows. And then in other countries, we see things like internships and actual mentorships. So this, of course, allows students to learn by doing and helps them develop those professional skills because they're in a professional environment working with professionals. It also gives them an opportunity to see the scope of the different job roles. So when a student, for example, a healthcare class that I went with to a hospital, while they might have an idea of 2 or 3 different jobs that are available to them in a local hospital, they might leave that experience seeing 14 or 15 more that they'd never considered. How does this happen? Well, it happens slowly, but it must happen intentionally, in that we've created a learning ecosystem or a learning city where we have multiple different agencies, both employers as well as potentially retired employers or retired industry leaders, so multi-generational, so different skills sectors from across the different career clusters can be involved. It can be managed in a lot of different ways, such as a learning database, where if a student is assigned a project to go out and interview someone in a particular skill industry that interests them, then we have a contact person that they can call or they can Skype with, potentially globally, so from around the world. If we've been successful, then students are able to connect with real life people and real life opportunities, both in their community and around the world, that help give them an idea of different kinds of opportunities for their post-secondary pathway. While I was here in India, I had the opportunity to go to Udaipur, which has been deemed a learning city. And this is something I'd love. Boulder, a good measurement tool would be for Boulder to become a learning city by 2018. But more on that project later. The last best practice, then I think probably the most important one and where I've spent the majority of my work here, is to create an educational pipeline. This would allow students, again, to use that platform